Welcome to I've Never Read Discord. I'm Andy, the newbie Luke.
This
Rocking.
is, yeah, rock on, Andy. This is Discworld veteran PJ Hart, rock on PJ, and welcome to I've Never Read Discworld. This month we are on book number, I want to say 14.
15, 14.
You can tell that I wrote the notes this episode because there are no notes, and we've lost all sense of factual mooring in the series.
Before we start talking soul music, I have got something awesome to show you.
Oh
So,
yeah,
I mentioned a couple of pods ago, I just moved to Hollywood, as in moving pictures, but not the Hollywood as in moving pictures. And it has charity shops galore. There's a place with like a whole strip of three
yeah,
charity shops in a row. There's maybe like seven on one street town. I walked into Save the Children, and I'm looking for Pratchett as ever. And I
always.
came by this. It's
Oh snap.
Pratchett and Baxter's Long Earth collection. Looks brand spanking new for £12. Like,
Amazing.
so
Yeah,
help
especially after
yourself.
our chat with Mark Burrows and seeing things popping up on Reddit quite often, I'm keen to get round to it, but I sort of feel that like I've got a lot of project going on. I'm still working through Rob Wilkins' book biography as well, so I think if I had three Pratchett books going at once, that might possibly be too much. That might stretch my endurance limits, but yeah, definitely on my list. Very keen to hear your thoughts. So what about this book? What about it?
So soul music. Right, let's see. I'm gonna bring up my notes because I don't want to torpedo this. I want to be tactful. Um,
He's just put his glasses on, listeners.
I put my glasses on. Um, so again, it's Terry's playing with the threads. He's always very interested in play, and I've called it the wonderment of waffle, and just sort of leaving no stone unturned, but leaving no stone turned at the same time as he builds his world. It's like walking through a carnival with so many amusements to look at and sounds and smells even.
Mm.
Um,
It's book 16, I've just discovered.
Book 16. And for
So,
me, a lot of people have described this as the teens as the golden stretch.
yeah.
And for me, moving pictures has been a high point. Like we probably shouldn't, I probably shouldn't have ranked them, but everything since then it's not been moving pictures, right? It can't be.
Yeah.
Um,
Too much hype? Is that the problem? People telling
well,
you?
here's the thing. I want to proper. It's not just tact. I want to properly contextualize it
Uh,
because, and certainly soul music is in that category. And if it's a perfectly, really enjoyable read, but they resonate so strongly, it's like feeling like this is a bit pretentious, but it's like they're living books. It's
mm,
like you can get the sensation of reading them long after you've closed them. They stay with you, the potent memories, you're thinking about them. Um, yeah, that's what I found.
yeah, absolutely. I think obvious connection to be drawn there between moving pictures and soul music, but interestingly, the themes of those about how art, whether it's movies or whether it's rock music, does affect the fabric of reality and does leave a lasting impression on our souls. Like, I think that's something that really shines through those books to the point where like those books then have a effect on the fabric of
Yeah.
our reality as readers, like, and leave a lasting impression on our souls. So I think, yeah, when people talk about this stretch as being kind of the first golden era of Discworld potentially, like part of that is they are becoming so much more interconnected. So like Reaper Man benefits in hindsight from the events of soul music, arguably, just fleshing out death and his world and his family and what it means to be him. Like, I think enriches then his entire arc through the whole series. And I think that's possibly part of that impatience that I had maybe when we were in the earlier period because that hadn't necessarily clicked yet, but now you're seeing that it has. So, yeah, I think there's a lot going on. And that's possibly what elevates soul music a little bit over moving pictures for me, although depending on what day you ask me, I would give you a different answer on what I prefer. But the introduction of Susan and the whole death family storyline that plays in parallel with the music with Roxanne's story, I think is, yeah, maybe just what elevates this a little bit higher for me potentially.
Yeah, two things there. Like, so triquels, I've called them.
Uh,
Terry really knows how to roll out a third book. So we've kind of seen this um with Death and with the Witches, whereas Reaper Man and Witches Abroad are both sequels, but at a tangent. And then we've got Lords and Ladies and Soul Music are both kind of more direct sequels to the first books, and that's a really good way to play that.
yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I think one of the things about moving pictures, even though like it rates highly usually when you speak to fans, the fact that it's not connected to any of the series, the ongoing character series, sort of does tend to leave it off to one side sometimes. Whereas, yeah, the fact that soul music is a really intricate part of the death storyline, and now, I mean, hopefully it's not a spoiler to say Susan's storyline because of where you leave her at the end of the book. Um, I think it makes it sort of it earns its place in the canon a little bit more potentially.
Can you
Um,
remember your first reading experiences?
of soul music, I would have, yeah, would have read it again as a school kid, probably around 14, 15, while I was like first trying to get into bands and stuff myself. I had no musical talent whatsoever, but I wanted to be in a band because all the cool kids in my school were in bands, and there was a little place down the street from my school called Gyros. I don't know if you were ever
The
there.
legendary gyros. No, I've
Yeah.
I've heard tales of it. If you're from Belfast or around about, you'll know what PJ's talking about. Um,
So real quick, for those who don't know, Gyros was a vegan cafe slash drop-in center slash gig space. So like run by a bunch of anarcho punks. It was about 100 yards from my school, and anybody could book the gig space for I think it cost £200, but they didn't ask you for any money. You just had to make that money back on the door, and the place held 200 people, and you could charge £3, something like that, to get in. So it was a no-brainer. So everybody all of a sudden, once we discovered this place, we all wanted to be in bands. So I I didn't have a musical bone in my body. I decided I would then learn to play bass guitar, as passively as I could. And I was in a bunch of different bands. I was in a couple of punk bands, and then I was in a metal band for a while with my friend Chris, who I'm still friends with, who actually lent me the microphone that I'm currently
Hmm.
recording this podcast with. He's sort of quite a successful video games YouTuber now called Deef, Deef. Should look him up. He was the drummer in this metal band that I was in, and yeah, the magic of like what means, what rock music means to the band and to the audience in soul music, like that was very much my life at that time. That brief period between like I don't know 2002 and 2005, or like, and then Gyro's closed down, unfortunately. So yes, I've got a lot of love for this. Like I read this book for the first time at exactly the right time in my life, you know. So be interested to see, like, does that misty-eyed kind of romance of rock music or whatever, does that still ignite your soul as a much older man on your first reading, or
I'm not sure. I mean, it's something that I'm not particularly musically talented, but like yourself, when I was fairly young, I wanted to be in a band. Um, I was very much into REM. Um, about early 90s, I guess, Out of Time would have been the album that would have been
oh
about
yeah,
then. And myself and my friend um, had an REM cover band called WAG, and we never played live. We just played in we got the use of a church hall on Sundays, and we just played for a couple of hours. Well, he played, Don McLean, actually. Um,
ah,
and I yelled and threw the mic stand about a bit and did some really screwed up dancing. It was very thin then, so it was quite a sight. And I did go on to learn how to play a few REM covers quite well on the guitar.
Nice.
But yeah, most of my skills in that area are long gone.
Yeah, I was fired from every band I was ever in. Like that's how bad I was. So yeah, but that's what it's all about. It's, yeah, so like
Let's go.
as we do. Now it's finally happened. Regular listeners will be
Yeah,
interested to know.
something new.
Stretching the definition of the word interested there. But Andy went on strike, refused to write the blurbs, point blank refused to write the blurbs for this edition of I've Never Read Discworld. So apologies, I wrote them in a massive hurry. They're not very good. So I'll spare Andy. I'll read the first one, which I've entitled Intro. Mort is dead. Isabel is dead. Death is death. Imp comes to the big city with dreams of harping on, but ends up with a guitar instead, plus a troll and a dwarf for a backing band. But no guild card. Susan makes trouble at school, she meets the death of rats, and it all comes flooding back. Is that good? I don't know. Was it good? Was that good?
It was all right. Yeah,
They get
yeah.
worse. They only get worse.
Oh no, no. You've been kicked out of several bands. I've only been kicked out of one. So you've got more experience than I have about these things.
Experience of rejection. Yeah.
So first off, did I forget that, or did we know going in that Mort and Isabel are dead?
I feel like, yeah, I mean, that's what's happening, like right at the start. Like that's what
Oh.
Death is watching and not intervening in. Yeah, it's a good point. I don't know if that's actually made clear.
The first time I remember getting it was maybe about, say, Act 4, where Susan is watching a carriage go off a cliff and musing on, that's just what it is. And I don't know if it said Mort and Isabel explicitly, but somehow I just got it, and I kind of wondered if everybody else got it at that point.
I think that's why it's better that you write these things because I'm not sure what's a spoiler and what's not. I think the fact that she's at boarding school, and I can't remember if it's certainly implied to me, or maybe it's just that default Harry Potter thing now. We're like, oh, it's a magical kid at boarding school. Their parents must be dead. Uh, but I think that, yeah, the default. Well, I knew obviously going into this read that like they were dead. So, but yeah, I possibly fluffed that reveal. That's a good point. Yeah, I'm not sure.
He does. He
Actually, but
does a
no,
good job in establishing that sort of goth boarding school girl thing.
yeah, I love
And
it.
Susan being kind of not quite in sync with the rest of us. She keeps disappearing on people, which is kind of amusing.
Yeah, I was like totally in love with the idea of Susan when I was a teenager. Like, imagine reading that for the first time when you're like 15, she, and I was like, yeah, as we've discussed previously, like a huge Sisters of Mercy fan, big goth and stuff. So, like, yeah, I was totally besotted with Susan the first time I read this book.
I see her compared to Susie Sue
Yeah,
on
yeah,
Elspeth and Gaben's death. I definitely saw the comparison with Gaben's death, although like not specifically strong, given her age as well. And that's another thing we get. She's 15, so it's now 15 years after the novel Mort. So I think it's the most definite notion of a timeline happening in the books.
now, but to complicate things for you, don't forget the time jump that occurs.
Yeah, yeah. Thought we were gonna not talk about the Ram Tops time
Yeah,
jump.
yeah, yeah. But it does help put things in perspective where this feels like, yeah, it's been a long time. Well, I mean, and it has been a long time on the disc since the events of Mort, unless you happen to be in the Ram Tops or unless you happen to live outside the realm of space and time, like that does. So
And I
yeah,
also noticed on the Elspeth, Susan compared to the character in Doctor Who, which definitely did occur to me later on. I did wonder. And you've got Death's Kingdom is sort of was bigger
Uh,
on the inside than it is
yeah,
on the outside, all that stuff.
of course. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm looking at a reference to
Oh,
our elf, Imp, and something else I recall from the Elfspace wiki. Uh, Imp is from the Welsh sounding, oh, I can't pronounce it,
right. Okay.
Llanidos,
Oh, yeah.
which is Sodom all spelled backwards.
Yeah, it's a Dylan Thomas reference, I think,
Ah,
if I remember correctly. It feels like it's like it would be the title of a Motorhead album or something as well. So it feels like really on theme or whatever, you know.
Again,
Sodomall.
we get more Ankh, more pork. Lived in um, was smell, of course, that dance immediately goes to foul over on.
Yeah.
Um, there's a scene, and I don't know if Terry's done this in a previous book, possibly has, but it really stuck out to me this time where um, somebody gets thrown, possibly Death himself, and possibly somebody else gets thrown in the river
Oh
and
yeah, it's
bounces
death, yeah.
off it.
Yeah, and the amount of time we get to spend in the mended drum, especially in the kind of first half, I love that. Because I sort of feel that like going back to the Wizards and doing a load of like Wizards investigating rock music is a very, oh, Wizards investigating movies. Like we did that already, but I think the way that it's kind of inverted and the way that the Wizards like properly embraced it this time instead of just being like aloof observers, like the Wizards get like
Yeah.
caught up in the fervor of it, I think really makes that play a lot better, makes it quite special.
Yeah, it's nice to see them letting their hair down. And
Or
this
up as the
gets, I
case maybe.
think, is so we get the mended drum or broken drums owner named for the first time. I think we're going to see more of him.
It's heavily implied that it's never quite clear who owns it when, because I think it changes hands. It's implied here, I think, that Hibiscus is a new owner, is it?
Yeah, yeah,
And I think that obviously fits in with the character of the drum because it's like a dangerous place to work. So the fact that it changes hands on a regular basis through whatever events that can kind of like fit whatever hole in the story it needs to fill then, because like yeah, in this book it's a music venue, which it may not have been in previous books, but that doesn't matter. It's just nice to have somewhere familiar to come back to in Ankh-Morpork in every book.
it was a pretty swift setup of the other members of the band. I'm
Yeah,
struggling with the names. The two naming thing that
Glod,
occurs.
yeah,
Yeah,
I know.
Claude Glodson and
Lace
Leas
or
Bluestone.
Lias, yeah.
What a great name! I don't know why
Yeah,
I'd want to change his name to Cliff.
nobody with that name is ever going to last long in rock music. Is that what it was? Yeah, about the Glod thing, because it just because Glod doesn't change his name, does he? Just so that they can have the constant Blues Brothers references, being on a mission from Glod.
Super glad. Aye. Um, and Mr. Cleat also stands out. There's that brilliant description of him of something like fossilized with life in it.
It's a Jurassic Park reference, which I thought was like really timely. It's like, yeah, Jurassic Park came out. Like this book came out in 1994. Jurassic Park, I think, only came out in cinemas 1993. But then I remembered obviously it was a book, and Terry would have for sure read the book, uh, which I've never actually read, but I assume that all that stuff. Yeah, I think the description of Mr. Cleet is that he's like something that's been frozen in amber and then brought back to life. So yeah, I assume that happens in the book of Jurassic Park as well, but I've never read it. Yeah, it's a great description because I think there's a lot going on in terms of who the antagonist of this book is, and it's the guitar, it's the music itself, in the same way that it was cinema itself in moving pictures. But you need that personification, you need that flesh and blood bad guy as well, and like Cleet doesn't get a huge amount to do in that regard, but the fact that he's so yeah well described as you say and so vivid, like it's enough, it's more than enough to kind of carry that threat the whole way through to that final chase then at the end.
Yeah, he's an obsessive psycho. Um, I'm just looking through. I'm not sure if we're at it yet. but I noticed reference to Hog's Watch Night, and this is where we get the longest footnote, the biggest detail of what Hog's Watch Night actually is. And I've been a bit excited about Hogfather for a while now.
Okay.
So this is a bit, yeah, a bit of a tantalizing trailer.
Yeah, and obviously there's a whole book that goes into it in much greater detail than that, so I can't. I'm wary to say anymore.
Yeah,
But
we'll get there.
we will get there. It's interesting, and it's so hard not to say more about that because like within that section, there's some other moving pieces around it in this book that all come back.
Well, we get the Tooth Fairy here, which Granny Weatherwax alluded, or Nanny Og alluded to.
Yeah.
As a very hard-working woman, but there's actually several of them, we're told here.
Oh, it's so hard. It's anybody who's listening who's read Hogfather is pulling their hair out right now. But we must move on. We cannot spoil
We're
Hogfather
going
for
to get the
Andy.
Christmas decorations up to that episode.
Yeah, well, I wonder like that could be interesting because
Maybe
right
some,
as we record, it's early June. Um,
a couple of months away,
Hogfather.
aren't we?
So let's see. So interesting times: July, Masquerade, August, Feet of Clay, September, Hogfather, October. We could find some filler. We can find something to do. At least push Hogfather to November, if not December.
Time for a Twitter poll, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think we owe it to ourselves to do that. I
You know,
mean,
actually, if I could just tangent a wee bit, I couldn't help myself when I was finishing this. I went and watched some Terry Pratchett interviews from the period, and there
oh,
was
cool.
one on the release of the animation of soul music, and I'm very excited to see that. I think it's one that would lend itself to animation very well in the same way moving pictures would. And from what I saw of the clips from the Cosgrove Hall piece,
Yeah.
yeah, lots of characters jumping up and down. It looks really good.
Yeah, I know like I was a bit down probably on the Weird Sisters animation, probably because my main recollection of the animated stuff is soul music, and I do remember it being like better, I guess. Just I guess as well at the time I watched it, it would have been more within the realms of my interests. Do you want to watch a cartoon about rock music or do you want to watch a cartoon about Shakespeare? Right? Do you know? So yeah, we could maybe swing back to that down the line. I'd be very interested in watching it again for sure.
You know, we're not done yet in this part because this is where my Discworld Emporium purchase really comes into its own. My Death of Rats
Oh,
t-shirt
there it is. There it
on
is.
screen for you.
Beautiful.
It's lovely, isn't it?
It actually is.
Um, and Death of Rats, yeah, this is the fullest we've had of that character, and is just so much fun here.
Yeah, and Quoth the Raven, his sidekick and translator.
Oh, yeah,
Such a good double act.
yeah. Put me in mind a bit of Gaiman's character Matthew the Raven, who's also a bit sarcastic. Quoth is a brilliant name, yeah. And I was telling PJ in chat, I've got two lovely little gerbils, and I've been feeling a bit guilty about walking around wearing my Death of Rats t-shirt in front of them.
As you should.
But we get that line in here about there being a death of gerbils as well, so I feel a bit less anxious now.
You're safe. You're not emotionally traumatizing your pets. It's good to know. Yeah, best I could do was a Scorpions tour T-shirt from 1992 for my rock attire for this episode.
Yeah, I was going to get the sunglasses out, but yeah.
Would you care to read one of my torturous blurbs?
Let's give it a go. First verse. Death joins a foreign legion and Susan takes on the duty. She is determined to save Imp's life when the music does it for her. The librarian joins a band with a stolen organ and the wizards go rockabilly. Ridcully investigates and Susan saves Imp from the Musicians Guild. The music is alive.
So there you go. Yeah, not great. I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
Yes, Death in the Foreign Legion. Lots of patches being open, and census forms not quite filled in properly because nobody can remember things, and things that they are there to not remember, forget.
If you haven't fluffed the reveal the way I did about Mort and Isabel being dead, I think there are some obvious intriguing questions being raised here. Is like, what the hell is Death up to? Like, because we've seen him give up before. Like he didn't want to do the duty before because he wanted to learn more about life in Mort, but now he's given up the duty because he wants to forget. And I guess, yeah, it's not clear what he wants to forget. So it's an interesting mystery. So maybe even if you're not buying into this whole elaborate gag about the Foreign Legion, at least you're kind of interested to find out why Death is running away. Is that fair to say? I don't know. Again, I feel that like having that spoiler from page one in my mind has maybe kind of altered how I read these bits, you
It's
know?
that thing about how is it? It's put like knowing the future before knowing the future before it happens, sort of thing.
Yeah.
It being ever present. The problem with knowing everything.
Yeah, well, Death says he could remember it as if it happened tomorrow.
Yeah.
It almost feels at this point that we are going to see more of Death, and it's going to be Susan trying to find Death. But then, why is it called soul music? Why are we spending time with these musicians? And it's really interesting that they fall into the B and the C storyline instead.
This was one of my favorite lines in the book when Albert and Quoth and the Death of Rats are trying to welcome Susan in, and they just sort of just got over the edge of convincing her that she's going to be doing the duty. And Albert's making her breakfast, and she snaps at him, and the first time she uses a voice in the line is, Albert, get me a boiled egg.
Ah, yeah, she won't eat the fried stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Terry's kind of characterizing Susan, like that she has, even though she disappears in her lessons and stuff like that, she does kind of take this quite straight-laced, sensible upbringing she's had to heart, and like she does want something healthy for breakfast, and she doesn't believe in the tooth fairy, and I think like that's what separates her quite distinctly from, say, Gaiman's Death. She is much more sensible, for want of a better word, I guess. And there's an obvious comedic juxtaposition there, and that gets so much mileage out of that. So I feel like we're not talking enough about the music in soul music.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a couple of elements to this. I mean, the backbeat is an awful lot of dad jokes, more than any Pratchett novel before. Dad jokes, bad jokes. I mean, they're logically functional puns, but they're just the sort that leave you with a groan.
No, I love
Like,
it. I can't get
that
enough
you
of it.
have to.
Now, I
Um,
mean, now as a fully paid up dad, I can't get enough of it. Like, I was wondering that. I was wondering, like, in the mid 90s, like, were these jokes cool or were they always this kind of naff? But I can't get enough of the puns, all the band names, all the references to rockabilly, and yeah, all the plays on words, all the puns. Like, I mean, Pratchett's famous for them for a reason, and yeah, this book is just it's bursting with them.
my
It would,
my
yeah.
first detailed bit of research writing, I was kind of Don McLean's famous American Pie
Uh-huh.
about the deaths of Buddy Holly, Big Bopper, and Richie Valens. So I remember trying to write a graphic novel based on that. It was one of
All
my
right.
first big projects. I'm doing a lot of research, and I don't know if I ever finished it. It really worked against me because turns out I thought Buddy Holly's music and the Big Boppers' music was crap. I mean, Richie Valens, La Bamba, wow, fantastic, just bold and dynamic. But this old sort of Chantilly lace, she's got a pretty face, and Buddy Holly sort of too simple to be nursery rhyme charming, just really kind of bland. And
Uh,
yeah, so I just
Sticking the boot into Buddy Holly. My
yeah.
goodness. No, I mean, I do agree. Like that, the early kind of first wave of rock and roll wouldn't be like a go-to genre for me either. But like, what's great about it? in the book, I think, is that those references are all, well, speaking as, white men from the Western world, or from the global North or whatever we want to call it, those references are pretty universal. So those kind of puns and those references work, but like what's working on another level is that it doesn't matter what genre of music first pulled you in, like just this experience of discovering music, that's universal, regardless of whether it was Buddy Holly or
Right.
Metallica or NWA or whatever.
It's a very strong thing for Pratch to tap on. It's a perfect thing because, if we go to Dawkins' idea of memes,
Mm,
as they were originally defined of being ideas that leap from brain to brain through a sort of infection. And the most powerful form of a meme in human history is music,
yeah.
song,
Hmm.
and rhyme. So yeah, it's absolutely the chords to be playing. That was a pun, and it wasn't a very good one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's no
Like,
puns
no,
left
no,
after
no.
all we've just read. Yeah, and the fact that the librarian gets involved. I don't know if there's been a book since the like Fantastic where he hasn't like actively got involved in some way. And I couldn't quite remember where this was going on this reread, and it's like the librarian joins the band, and then he's gone again. What's that about? And obviously, there's a great payoff that we're going to get to, but even just like the sequence of him stealing the organ from the opera house and Colon just being like, okay, just letting them away with it.
And we're not quite there yet, but his reason being for quitting is that the Dibbler has moved in. Is just it's perfect.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and
yeah.
and when I was reading that, I thought I saw Dibbler's name on the page, and I got right. It's all bets are off. Chaos
Yeah,
from here on in.
yeah, and it sort of feels like obviously Dibbler's involvement and the Wizards' involvement as well. It's a conscious callback to moving pictures. And I think the fact that Dibbler does basically go through the same trajectory that he did before means that the Wizards had to do something different, and that really works. And there is something quite comforting in the fact that Dibbler is just always going to be Dibbler. He's always going to ride that wave of whatever the new hotness in Discworld is to disastrous results, you know.
I mentioned Dirk Gently there, and I think Ponder Stibbins is shaping up to be a character very much in that sort of Dirk Gently style.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I love, yeah, I love the idea of this sort of new wave of magical students. And um, my favorite title. I actually somebody asked me. I'm organizing a festival, and we're just giving ourselves temporary positions of responsibility. And I was asked what a title I wanted, and I said, could I be head of indefinite studies?
Yeah, tenured position for life,
Yeah.
obviously.
And Ridcully as well. Ridcully's the hunter gamekeeper, and Ridcully is coming out. He is actively involved with the goings on. It's almost as if he's starting to care about what's going on at the university.
Yeah, and in a weird way, it's separating him from the faculty that's kind of done that. The fact that they are all caught up in this thing and he isn't, and he's like the sort of character who would never get caught up in this in a million years, you know, like because you say he's that old country boy set in his ways, like anything new or modern just bounces off him, like rock music, like wouldn't even make a dent in Ridcully. So he's the perfect character, the perfect foil to to be the outsider and to be the one investigating it. And yeah, like you say, the fact that the rest of them get caught up in it and he sort of tries to save them, even though he's ostensibly trying to save the world. Like he's sort of he knows, he remembers what happened in moving pictures, and he thinks that's going to happen again, and he wants to save the rest of the wizards from that. It's quite sweet in a way.
Do you think so? I was just wondering why it is that he's seemingly immune to some respects to the music, and you think that's what it might be, the moving pictures experience.
I think that's why he can see the danger in it. Like, and there's, while he's at the gig later on, like he's basically waiting for moving pictures type stuff to go down. But why it doesn't affect him, like in this world of the university where the rest of the faculty are rebellious teenagers, Ridcully's the dad. So he can't
Right.
be affected by it,
Perfect
right? Yeah,
analogy.
so it's great. I think
Uh,
it's perfect.
I was just thinking, I mean, Ponder, Wise Ways is much too young. Um, the the Dean and the Bursar are permanently cuckoo, it seems anyway. Um,
Yeah, I sort of feel that the
the
decision to,
Librarian's his own, he plays his own tune.
well, the librarian, as we saw in moving pictures, is very tuned into these things. I think, he's an early adopter whenever
Yeah.
something kind of comes along like this, whether it's cinema or rock music.
So
I think he
fun.
went ham with the Dean just because the word Dean lends itself to so many puns.
Oh, I just got that. Yeah.
With Deans, with the Jeans slash Deans, and with James Dean and all that stuff. So
There's
yeah,
that wonderful sequence where I think Dean and Ridcully are having that sort of father son try to go to your room kind of, well, I'll rebel if I want to sort of stuff.
I don't
Yeah.
remember you giving you permission to paint it black.
Um,
So I mean, we're bouncing around a lot in this one, but I think
yeah,
that's kind
we
of
should probably circle back around to the band themselves and where they're at. So they've all changed their names. Um, and yeah, Dibbler's got them in their sights. Yeah, there's a great scene where you mentioned it where they steal the piano and um, Cliff rearranges his door to make it a piano shaped
oh
door.
yeah. Yeah, I love this stuff with the librarian and with the piano, and because it's where all the meatloaf references kind of start to bleed in, and like that is an artist whose music who's referencing this a lot that I'm 100% behind. Can't get enough meatloaf. Have Bad Out of Hell Volume One, two copies of it on vinyl because I ruined
Um,
one of them. Yeah, uh, and I just love the theatricality of Meatloaf and Steinman's music. I think it lends itself so well to this kind of story. Like it's exactly what I think about when I think about the performing with the librarian. They're in like the third movement of Paradise by the Dashboard Light or something like that. And you can just see the librarian just going like Jim Steinman's sweat dripping down him, 1 foot up and everything. Like, I think it actually says in the book that he's playing with his toes and everything because obviously he's got, 8 feet. And yeah, it just makes me smile so much. I can't remember there. I'd have to check Elspace there are for the specific Meatloaf references. Um, I think the opening lines of Paradise by the Dashboard Light are definitely referenced somewhere. But
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I noticed from Elspace there were quite a few Meatloaf references, and it's not an artist I've never ever connected with.
Oh
I
man,
was
you're
I was
missing
wanting
out.
to ask you how many, well, not how many Meatloaf references, but on a scale of 1 to 10, um, there's a lot of Meatloaf references.
Yeah, so the I remember everything, every little detail as if it happened only yesterday, which is what Death says. I think it's one of the first thing he says when we realize that he's trying to forget. That is, yes, from the opening of a Meatloaf song called Paradise by the Dashboard Light. Oh, there's a 2 out of 3 ain't bad reference, which could be a specific reference to Meatloaf, or it could just be a reference to the fact that people say 2 out of 3. And then the whole business with the motorbike and the rose between the teeth catching fire, like that's the cover basically of Bad Out of Hell. And the way the motorbike is described at the end is very similar to the motorbike on the cover of Bad Out of Hell. So
Yes, I
uh,
take it this was a Josh Kirby cover that you do approve of.
that is correct. Yeah.
It is quite striking. It's a great cover. You know what? I'll make you a promise if I remember. Before we look at the soul music animation, I give those two Battered Hell albums a listen to.
Can't get enough of all those guys. So absolutely loving every time there's a reference to them in this, and definitely recommend you check them out before we watch the cartoons.
So the interview with Terry about the soul music animation, he's absolutely talking with great passion and love for the soundtrack of it. Um, I don't know if it ever got released independently, but he was very much of the heart that it should be. So
Yeah,
yeah, I look forward to that.
I don't have. I sort of remember, without giving too much away, because I know you will watch it. Like I remember, like this sort of bands that they were riffing on, like who they were kind of sending up on the soundtrack. I don't really know specific
I think they were
songs.
going for generic sort of types.
Well, it's yeah, it's sort of it moves between genres, I guess is all I'll kind of say from my recollection. Maybe I've got that wrong, but yeah, I can totally see why. Like obviously, if you didn't get that right, you're in trouble if you're adapting this book. So yeah, I don't remember being put off by it, but no, it's not like I'm still tapping my feet to any of those songs 25 years later or anything like that. So, um,
Do you want to have a read at the next
yeah,
one?
go on. Yeah, sure. So this is first chorus. The patrician hears about music with Roxanne. Ridcully enlists the help of students. Ugh. Dibbler becomes manager, and the band with Roxanne plays the cavern. But the guitar is taking over Imp. The music wants to be free, so Dibbler arranges a festival and a tour, while Ponder reveals how to capture the music in a box. Claude and Lais revisit the pawn shop where they bought the guitar, but it's no takesy backsies. Ridcully has breakfast with death.
Oh, a lot happening in that slice. And before we can get to the patrician, we've also got a few cameos of Nobby and Colon.
Oh yeah, of
Welcome
course,
returns.
always.
Yes, veterinary.
Doesn't
Hmm,
really end up doing much though. I mean, it's more of a vehicle to set up the beggars, those scenes, isn't it? Because they do actually end up playing a bit more of an active role later, which I completely neglected to include in the blurbs. But yeah,
veterinary is kind of like a threat hanging over people's head by not actually doing anything. Just this mere existence propels people to act in certain ways.
yeah, and you get that it's sort of slowly building up the fact that Philo, Ron, Cumbly, Michael, like that whole gang of beggars, that they're present but invisible, essentially, and that does sort of become mildly important to Death's storyline, I guess, later on.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not like the Patricia never has to actively intervene in this story, maybe in the way that he has in certain previous ones. So
Yeah.
if something like this was happening in Ankh-Morpork Park now, and you'd read all the books up to this point, you would be wondering, like, what's Vetinerary's take on this? Like, is he allowing this to happen, or is he actively trying to stop it? It would just bother you to think that something this seismic is happening in the city without the patricians knowing about it, or doing something about it, or deciding not to do something about it.
Yeah.
Now that you have a good understanding of how the city works.
There's an element of Occam's razor with stuff that he does, like whatever's going to cause the least hassle.
Yeah, they should probably say that on his coat of arms. Like that's like his whole philosophy of government, basically, is like
Yeah.
whatever causes the least hassle. So, yeah,
And that Mr. Cleet starts thinking in a sort of a what would veterinary do kind of way that um, he knows that if loads of people go out and buy guitars and play festivals and refuse to join the guild, then veterinaries just can say, well, tough,
no guild.
like,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. He's aware that like pragmatism is veterinary's watchword, so he knows that his position is potentially untenable. I forgot to make reference to the guitar maker, actually.
there's oh yes, there's two characters that have a factory, and they're named after guitar makers. And
Yes,
I'm
yeah,
fairly sure.
Yeah, Gibson is the apprentice, which is obviously Gibson's guitars, but
Yeah.
I'm spacing on the name of the main guy, and I just love how like recognizable the guitar shop is. And he's got the Discworld equivalent of the no stairway sign. You're not allowed to play Stairway to Heaven in a guitar shop,
Yes.
which I think is referenced in Wayne's World as well. Yeah, so even like it's really interesting that it's not just all these rock music references. Like there's a lot of Blues Brothers references. I'm not sure if that's a direct Wayne's World reference, but like even things like the motorbike, like that's is a Meatloaf reference, but it's a reference to like the artwork and the music videos of Meatloaf, not even specifically to the music. Like just the whole culture of rock music is kind of up on full display here, which makes it feel really authentic and really like a labor of love, I guess.
Yeah, that really helps. If I wasn't bored by the sort of Cliff and Buddy references, and there's something else comes along on the next page. It's like, yeah, that's pretty cool on it.
Yeah,
Then
because on face value with the band, it's like it's Buddy Holly and Cliff Richard, and you're like, oh, I don't know, they wouldn't be my go-to choices on the stereo, like, you know. But looking at it in the big picture, like that's where it starts, I guess, with your Buddy Hollys and your Elvises, and then all of a
yeah.
sudden later on they're making references to I think there's meant to be a U2 reference later on
Mm.
with the And You. There's a
And of
band
course,
called
imp or body is elvish.
Oh yeah, is he Elvis?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's something there. Terry definitely has a bit of a fascination with Elvis, which is, for somebody of his generation, totally understandable. And then the Cavern, obviously, is
Oh
the
yes.
Cavern Club in Liverpool where
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Beatles started out.
Yeah.
And
Beatles reference is much more welcome.
okay, yeah. See, for me, I was never. I'm much more of a Meatloaf fan than a Beatles fan, which I'm sure makes me a Philistine, but whatever. Uh, I did notice on Elspace, I can't take credit for this one either, that the Cavern Club or the Cavern in Ankh-Morpork, as per the Ankh-Morpork city map, is on Quarry Lane, and the Beatles were originally known as the Quarrymen, and they have a song called Penny Lane.
Oh.
So yeah, when I get into trouble on these podcasts, I just steal content from the annotated Pratchett. So yeah, as we were chatting about the guitar shop and stuff like that, obviously the reason for that is because other people are getting involved and they want to play, the infectious nature of music with rocks in, similar to how, the whole infectious nature of cinema is portrayed in moving pictures. All of a sudden, people like Crash and
Scum.
Scum uh, are dead keen to buy guitars, and the
Play Anarchy and Ankh-Morpork. Great.
can't beat it. Yeah, oh yeah, so there you go. So you're going all the way from the Buddy Holly references to the Sex Pistol references.
Punk, yeah.
And then and they talk
And of
about
course, punk was, well, through my rose tinted glasses, was all about the do it yourself. You just pick up and play and go, and yeah, that dovetails very nicely here.
yeah, and I think that it's the right time because we're sort of just over the midpoint. It's the right time for the story to escalate and for the stakes to kind of increase. So again, even though he doesn't have like a blurb at the start the way he does Lords and Ladies directly tying this to any previous books, I think for readers who have read moving pictures, there is something for them here where you kind of recognize his trajectory, and he knows that. So there's some subversions coming, but he's laying all the pieces for that here. He's going, right, if you've read moving pictures and you can see the similarities, okay, well here it is, it's getting bigger. So you're going to start thinking as a reader the same way that Ridcully starts to think that like Greeblies from the dungeon dimensions are about to erupt. But it's not about that. There's a reason why all these other storylines with Death and Susan are going on as well. And they're all going to come together at the end instead and subvert that, which is really nice.
He's very good at slow building stuff while keeping you entertained at the same time.
Well, that's it. I mean, if you can throw as many puns out per page as Terry Pratchett can, then yeah, your story can take as long as it wants, basically. And it's especially because his joke per page count has also massively increased by this stage as well. I think he's left the day job many years ago now, well, 5 or 6 years ago, I think, at this point. And from what I've been reading in the biography, like his daily word count has skyrocketed as a result. And I think just the more you hone that craft, obviously, the better you get at it. And he's just absolutely on top form in this one.
What was his have you been able to find out what was his method? Like, did he just get up in the morning and write?
Pretty much.
Repeat every
Yeah,
day as
yeah.
much as possible?
Yeah, once he quit the day job, that's pretty much just what he did. And then on Fridays, as a treat, he would spell check instead of writing.
Oh,
So, I
poor
mean, well, you know,
Dolphins.
yeah, no, like the dude absolutely put us to shame. Like, obviously, we're both writers, but I don't think either of us is writing 3,000 words a day. Have you ever written three? I think I maybe wrote 3,000 words a day once for a deadline.
I went through a spell. I don't know if I mentioned it on here, but the best writing advice I've ever had was from Julia Cameron's The Artist's Workbook,
Oh, yeah, yeah. I remember
or
you were
The
doing that
Artist's
in the
Way, it's
syllabus.
called. And
Okay.
essentially, it's a book on writing, but it's like a 12-week course as well.
Uh-huh.
And Cameron has two key bits of advice. One is once a week, take yourself out on an artist's date. Just yourself, no spouse, no friends. Go for a walk, go to the cinema, whatever. The other key bit of advice is get up every day, and as soon as the day starts, write 3 pages. It doesn't have to be cogent, it doesn't have to be polished. It can be codswallop. In fact, the general idea is just to get your hand moving across your page. And what happens is the subconscious comes tumbling out. You find yourself writing stuff you've never written before. It can be really playful, releasing experience. So I did this for about 12 weeks.
Yeah, well,
I was writing like children's stories, which I'd never done in my life before.
amazing.
Um, I've all sort of things. Of a comic strip coming out next year with an American publisher that's very inventive, and this came out of these sessions.
Oh, great.
It's a way to get really productive, um, and a lot of it is going to be crap, but it's a really good way of just sort of emptying your brain onto the page.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Yeah, so imagine doing that, but then just carrying on for the rest of the day. That seemed to be pretty much what Terry did 4 days a week, which is insane. But I mean, books like this came out of it, so obviously it worked.
Yeah. Wow. Let's get. Oh yes. So Dibbler is being asked to give a free concert, which takes him a minute for the penny to drop and realize how this could be quite uh, income incurring.
Yeah,
But he figures it out eventually. He figures it out with Dibbler like panache.
yeah, it feels quite timely that actually in a way that it wasn't at all in 1994, where like the expectation that music is free is default now, because of the internet and because of, Napster, beget Livewire, beget Spotify, etc. So that puts the industry in a position where if the music has to be free, then it's not the musicians who make the money, it's people like Dibbler who
Yeah.
make the money. And
Yeah.
that's like 30 years ahead of its time, probably. That kind of,
Yeah,
well, I mean,
and I was just thinking of the Simon and Garfunkel concert in New York Central Park, which famous studio album, and I think that might be free.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's interesting. Yeah, in real life, the inverse of this has happened. It's like you have to pay through the nose to go to a live gig now because recorded music is the expectation to be free. Whereas in the book,
yeah,
the concert's free just so they can sell all the stuff. But even at that, some friends who are in bands and musicians still to this day, and that conversation about like how you maximize your sales essentially on merch and stuff like that's where bands break even because touring obviously costs a lot of money, even though tickets are expensive and stuff like that. Like sometimes the margin of profit for a band comes down to how many t-shirts they sell, and like nobody sells more t-shirts than Dibbler. Like, nobody.
and sells t-shirts to several other businesses as well
Yeah,
to sell on.
it's brilliant.
Yeah, he's taken quite a cut. Uh,
Yeah, it's such an interesting time for music when you think about when this was written, I guess, in the early 90s.
You know, I think my first CD purchase was about 94. So it was Patti Smith's Return People Have the Power,
Oh, nice.
the
Good,
album. Well,
good
certainly
choice.
the lead single, which is really great. Do you remember
Yeah.
your first CD?
My first CD, I remember, ooh, um, oh, it's a tough one. Because I didn't have I was very blessed that my older brother had just like a literal bedroom full of CDs. And I wanted for nothing because he's like 10 years older than me and he just had everything. So I had a lot of tapes that I taped off his CDs. My first CD was probably something really naff though, probably like the Men in Black single or something like that. You know, like Will Smith or something like that. um, yeah, that's a shame actually, because in a way it was great that I just had access to this seemingly unlimited music library, but then I can't think tangibly what the first one. Although I tell you this, I remember this. I'll give you this story, right? Real quick. I won a talent competition aged 12. Yeah, so it was on a cross community trip, actually over the Easter of 1998. So it was on a cross community trip when the Good Friday Agreement was signed in Birmingham, of all places. And on this trip, yeah, I know.
It's a really good story.
Yeah, right. So on this trip, we had a talent competition, and my act was a Lily Savage impersonation, and I won. And the prize was a £10 gift voucher for Virgin Megastores. And at that time, a paperback novel was £6. I bought a Discworld book. I can't tell you which one because I can't remember. And I spent £4 on a CD single, and it was the Manic Street Preachers. But again, I can't remember what single. I could probably work it out, like what they would have had released around that time. You know, Easter, just after Easter, 1998. Uh,
I
so
went to see I went to see the Manics play in the basement of Ulster University around 2002. Got this lovely black t-shirt with a leopard print tie on it.
oh yeah,
Same venue that I went to see Patti Smith play within a year or two of them.
yeah, the old Connor Hall, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm now so right. This is a massive diversion. We'll have to move on after this. But in 1998, the album they had out was "This Is My Truth, Tell Me Yours," and the
Yeah.
singles were
Oh,
yeah. I
this
definitely had the
album.
ever. I had the single of the Everlasting for sure. So it might have been that. Other than November 1998, that seems late.
This is one of their big pop albums.
It might have been If You Tolerate This,
Starting.
which was number one. So
Yeah.
I helped get the Manics to number one potentially. That was August 1998.
So
Good
we've
album,
gone, well, we're
right?
kind of on theme still, really.
Yeah, I mean, that's what this is, and this is, I think, like why this book resonates and why it's quite high up a lot of people's lists is because it inspires these kind of conversations, like what music in your life made you feel this way, and the constant descriptions of how music makes you feel, like that's what makes this book special. It doesn't matter if you're talking about rockabilly, it doesn't matter if you're talking about REM or the Manics or post punk or hip hop or anything. So,
Both Ponder and then Dibbler are inventing a recording device at this point. They're inventing, I mean, it's a box with a bit of wire in it. And so I write this serialized novel for my patrons on patreon.com/Andy Luke.
check it out.
And I've been looking into early cassette recordings because there's a spy narrative to it. So these are essentially like these first mini phones, like
Hmm.
cassette recorders in the 1950s, mid 1950s, are essentially they're spool, they're bits of wire.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I mean the battery time in these things was incredible, like for the era that um they were in. I mean, this is 57, so you could get ones that would run for weeks,
Wow.
allegedly.
Oh yeah, because spy stuff, right? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was magnetic, like, well, they called it tape, but it was actually like a wire,
Uh-huh.
much as is described here.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a brief moment where a dog sits and looks into the box, and it's like the HMV logo. I know it makes me think.
Oh, clever.
Again, just stole that from Elspeth. Didn't notice myself on reading it. But
I
yeah,
wondered if we were seeing a few appearances of our Gaspode show. Yeah.
yeah. Well, yes. Sorry, have to again restrain the spoilers and stuff. But there's nothing to say that it wasn't Gaspode. I suppose he's the dog looking into the box. Could have been, but yeah, I think because of the abundant moving pictures similarities, it feels probably okay not to have Gaspode involved in this one. So part four, shall we, or
Ridcully
do you
and
want to?
Susan, I
Yeah.
want to talk about.
Oh
I'm
yes, the
sorry,
breakfast.
did I
No,
step in on your
no,
feet there?
absolutely not, because
Yeah,
I put that in the last description and we didn't talk about it.
yeah.
Is it?
We've not really. There's layers to Ridcully, and he's really opened up here. We've only really seen this with Granny Weatherwax, where there's just this whole other side to him that comes out. This really. I mean, he's probably been charming all along. I've just not noticed. But I think Granny and Susan really throw the charm out of him. They let him express it so much. He is absolutely lovely here. He's a real gentleman.
Yeah, it's an interest. Well, because he has always been described that way, he's like a country gent, but then all the focus up till that point has been on the country and not so much on the gent.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, it makes him feel fully fleshed out because he does have the correct manners to have a conversation with somebody as potentially imposing as Susan, who is at this moment in the story death across the breakfast table, rather than with like the right of ask Ashanti and all that kind of stuff. Like, he can just be a perfectly good host and invite her to breakfast and I'd sit down and have a conversation with her. And yeah, it also just reminds me about the maids and the doo-wopping maids, Molly, Polly, and Dolly. All that little stuff, yeah, because it's sort of like when you just talk about all the things that happens in the book, and you can talk about as many references as you want, but the fact that they're just injected in all the right places, it just makes it feel that like this music thing is just taking over the city in a way that like we didn't see in moving pictures because Hollywood was this like separate location. And even though we had the cutbacks to Dibbler in the cinema and stuff, it didn't feel as like all enveloping as the
Yeah,
music thing does,
you had the sort of the train, the people train.
Yeah,
Whereas
which
now
was,
it's in Ankh-Morpork and
yeah, and
it's landed there and it's growing.
if you wanted to go out of your way to read something more into that, you could say the fact that like the high-ranking wizards are into it, and also the maids, the working class people are into it as well, and it's like music transcending class, blah 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 blah. So
And,
like, yeah,
and
I,
Mrs.
I do I
Fellowes
do feel that's conscious.
undergarments.
Yeah, yeah. Didn't
Really?
did, didn't need that mental image again.
Mrs.
Yeah.
Whitlow?
Uh, I love the way that the interactions between the staff and the wizards in the university, regardless of context, are always great.
Just the other thing I want to pick up on there is uh Chrysoprase, the rather scary troll, isn't he? The
Yep, he's
security.
back.
We've seen him before, but I think here he's much more. Well, he's not here a lot actually, but he is much more threatening. Much like I said about the patrician, the threat of him existing
Yeah,
is
because
enough.
I think the last place we seen him was in Weird Sisters, fronting the money for the theatre, and now he's here launching the career of the band with Roxanne. So I mean, he's just a patron of the arts. He's just a kind-hearted patron of the arts. Loves the theatre, loves music, just wants to give something back to the community.
Yeah,
You
sure.
know, whether he's going to pull your teeth out if the payments aren't made on time, that's completely besides the point. Just like the Arts Council.
And asphalt seems rather to is pleasant the right word to be in the employ of Dibbler.
Yes, well, he's originally, yes, because Asphalt's a troll and he's works at the cavern. So yeah, the assumption I guess is that he's works for Chrysoprase, and then he kind of gets well, poached by Dibbler. And this is like, I know I've been leaning on Elspeth a lot, but this is my favorite reference that I didn't get from the first time I read this. Was that Asphalt is, what's his job?
Oh, he's a band manager.
He's a
Oh,
roadie,
roadie.
and his name's
Oh,
Asphalt, which they use to make.
oh,
Amazing. Amazing. Cannot be beat. That is a pun that cannot be beat.
oh, Dad.
Yeah. I
Daddy.
was, didn't get that the first time round. Didn't get it the second time round either. Had to read it on Elspeth. Uh, but that is absolute elite tier pun right there.
Let's get on the road, shall
Yeah.
we?
One, two, three, four.
Bridge. Death doesn't get drunk, or does. The band with rocks in goes on tour. Imp can't take much more. Albert catches up with Death. God has Imp's harp repaired, and the Hyde Park Festival is a go.
Especially because it's a book about rock music, ostensibly. We have to wait quite long for the traditional somebody gets shit faced scene in in Discworld.
Yeah, that was a fairly epic. Someone gets shit faced scene. Um, I, I don't know if it's at this point. I think it probably is where Death has his full on rant,
Yeah, it
and
is.
it is
Yeah,
even with all those other eccentricities, and we've seen some rants before. This was, yeah, I think A plus.
absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a callback to Small Gods. The what is it all about then? Really? It's like a
I think you know what it hadn't occurred to me until this podcast, but I think I'm going to shift Death's rant to my best scenes category. Absolutely.
yeah. It's I think that I've seen your notes obviously, and for I think we're both probably like arguing between the same two scenes for a favorite. Like, cause yeah, it's this and the one that we're going to talk about next, probably. But yeah, because you know, our regular listeners will know as well that I love it every time there's a good drunk scene, a good drinking session in Discworld. I've got a soft spot for that. Nobody does it better than Death. It's also like what nerdy screenwriting people call like the all is lost moment, you know, and this is Death's all is lost moment, and yeah, I've never seen one so so funny, so charmingly written, so so engaging. Yeah, it's great. Can't get enough of it. Hibiscus is earning his keep, literally, in these bits as well.
And this is where we get, yes, Death thrown onto the Yank River.
Bouncing off, yeah.
Um, yeah, again, Death of Rats has really been impressing me, either twinned with Albert or twinned with Quoth.
And
Uh,
now you know why they sell a t-shirt, right?
yeah, oh, absolutely. This is a breakthrough album for Death of Rats.
100%, yeah. Because think about all the characters that you've been reading up until this point who don't have their own t-shirt.
It's not really until Albert gets involved with the quest that they're properly searching for Death. Um, I wondered a bit if that plot thread was maybe a bit stalling, but we do get some awesome stuff in that quest. We get the soldiers at war who've been taken away by the sort of muses. Um,
Yeah. All the kind of weird death slash not death stuff that's happening. I think the reason, because the previous interactions between Albert and Susan is like, okay, well, somebody's doing the duty, so it's fine. Death has wandered off before; he'll come back, and then yeah, weird stuff starts happening. So it's like, oh, okay. Albert actually has to get off his ass and do something.
And it's a resonant theme as well that I mean we had Mort kind of refused to condemn the princess, but yeah, we have the very same here with Susan's relationships to him, and even before the chip shop reveal at the end, you know you can imagine that Terry has has written the coupling. And it's the same sort of intention.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, something actually we haven't really touched on much so far. Just the relationships. Whether it's the potential romantic relationship between Susan and Imp, or this grandfather granddaughter relationship that Susan had with Death that was then erased. And I find all that stuff like really, really heart-wrenching, actually. And the fact that Death has lost his daughter and his son-in-law, I guess, slash former apprentice, and then had this other family relationship that he could have leaned on, or that they both could have leaned on in their grief, but that was erased. And it obviously really, really meant something to him. Like that just quadruples the tragedy. And then it makes the fact that, yeah, he wants to go and forget. He wants to go to the Clutching Foreign Legion. He wants to drink himself to death, throw himself into the Ankh, do all that stuff. It just makes it so more believable, I think, in a way. Even though we're talking about, spooky skeletons, he never forgets or whatever. Like I find myself genuinely moved by that stuff on this reading, just thinking, I don't know, maybe just, when you're a kid and you read this and it's all about the rock music and all the funny jokes about meatloaf and stuff, but then as a grown up and you're thinking about like, yeah, like especially family relationships potentially that have gone off the rails or that ended too soon or whatever, then it's just like a lot more real, a lot more serious. And those two stories mesh really, really well, and they complement each other really well. And it's part of the genius.
And I'd look forward to that when we come to the animation, or if I reread this at some point. What really spoke to me was the relationship between the band in relation to Claude and Cliff, looking at Buddy and what he has become. And it's a very sort of satirical Spinal Tap kind of, one member of the band will push the limits, and it's very easy to satire, but it goes way past satire, and it's a proper sort of study of someone going through sort of mental health problems because of
Yeah, it's a good point actually. Yeah, the way that Buddy is isolated within the band group by the music, by the guitar, there's a potential metaphor to read into that, I suppose, maybe in terms of drugs or whatever. So yeah.
right. Hmm.
Anything else of note? Yeah, the festival. So the Hyde Park Festival. So I love that we're still in this phase of Discworld where like huge geographical locations within the city can just appear out of nowhere. Like we'd never heard about Hyde Park before. Obviously, it's a reference to the real Hyde Park in London, where the Rolling Stones, I think, once played quite an infamous outdoor concert. And this one looks like it's going to kick off potentially to the same extent because we know who's behind it, Dibbler. It's definitely not going to go smooth. Oh, and then the tour, actually. Yeah, so before that happens, the
Yeah,
band are
so
on
I was
tour.
wondering from the first act, when are we going to get a Discworld tour? And well, about halfway through the book, I thought, no, we're going to stay in Ankh Park. It looks like, and yeah, let's go with that. And then yes, we've got the tour, a few stops outside, well enough outside the city.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
Quirm, Stohillet, and one other stop.
Pseudopolis.
Pseudopolis, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm getting there.
So, I mean, there's no real point trying to map it onto real world geography, but so,
Somewhere with a
so
lot of cabbages.
yeah, so Ankh-Morpork is London, let's say. So we know from Pseudopolis Yard, being the headquarters of the watch, that Pseudopolis is ostensibly Scotland, right? Is that fair to say? And then I think
Yeah.
Leonard of Quirm, Leonard, so that's Leonardo da Vinci, so that's supposed to be Italy, but it's full of cabbages, isn't that right? And then Stohillet, I'm not sure about. Um, so yeah, as a tour, it doesn't seem very economically viable if we map it onto Round World.
No, I don't even want to try that.
But my favorite is the scene where they just wake up in the haystack and the carts in the swimming pool, and it's just, yeah, it's pure Spinal Tap, isn't it?
Yeah, we get that sort of Sergio Leone sort of enter a tavern, everybody looks at you, and that kind of and the magic guitar kind of works its thing and sort of eases things out. So it's not all a curse. It does save them quite a few
Yeah,
times.
yeah, and then we find out obviously in the next bit why that is. I don't think there's any question that it has its own motivations, but up to a certain point, that involves keeping them all alive. And again, it's an inverted way of looking at that universality of music. Music brings people together, whatever. But that's something that, yeah, that like I never played a gig outside of Belfast, obviously, but getting up on stage in front of a room. I remember sharing a stage, if you could even call it a stage. Do you remember in the old Katie Daly's? Well-known-ish
Just
rock bar in Belfast back in the day, attached to a nightclub.
the
Uh,
limelight.
yeah, so Katie
Yes,
Daly's was the
yes.
bar beside the Limelight. And occasionally, if you weren't good enough to play the Limelight, you could play in Katie Daly's, but it didn't have a stage as such. It had like a raised area, which usually had tables on it where you could, sit. And then if there was a gig on, they would just clear the tables off the raised area, and that would be the stage. But that's also where they put the Christmas tree. So I remember we had a gig there. We were supporting some band from Dublin or something, and we had to share the stage, which wasn't even really a stage, with the Christmas tree, and we played like thrash metal. We were like, it's not like we played Christmas music or anything. Like it was so tonally off, and like nobody cared that we were there. Nobody was there to see us. Just that hostility that you can get. Like that resonated with me. It's like I wish I had a magic guitar to win people over that day.
No, I'm thinking about the closest I've come to that sort of touring experience. Right, I did this comic um, called Absence about
Oh yeah,
epilepsy
yeah.
about 14 years ago now. Um, and I got funding for it, and I got asked to do a lot of speaking gigs, signings, workshops in a couple of years. And so, yeah, that sort of resonates with me on that basis. I remember flatly refusing to do a Waterstones gig in Lisburn. Um,
Oh, look at this guy with his demands. No, no, no brown M&Ms in the bowl that day. Waterstones in Lisburn, like.
and my artist, Stephen Downey, my artist, I was his writer. He insisted, no, look, we do it. I think it was because they weren't paying any petrol money.
I mean,
Um,
well, that's fair. I mean, yeah, you shouldn't be out of pocket, of course.
and we got there, and there was like this huge line, a huge. They had like crisps and drinks for us. We'd like a sort of a green room area. I think we might have got taken out to dinner afterwards. Everybody was absolutely lovely, so I was totally wrong about that. But
First
I
in.
guess a lot of this, where I'm going, is a lot of this book must come from Terry's experiences on himself as a touring writer. Now that
Oh, yeah,
Discworld
good point.
is a thing,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
has
yeah,
been for a while.
I read in the biography that he did do quite a lot of promotion. Like he was pretty relentless about it. He saw it as part of the job, so he was like relentless with the writing, but he was pretty relentless with the promotion as well. So that's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't considered that.
And actually, I think I'm just remembering I read on Elspace. Thank you, Elspace. That the name Susan came from the sort of it was sort of girl that he imagined might show up to one of these signings,
Oh
but
yeah.
then when he'd see her next time, her name would be Susie, Suze, or something a bit more cosmic
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or Kerrang.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's just part of growing up. Yeah, I mean, I changed my name to PJ and I still go by PJ. It's obviously not my real name. So, who am I to judge?
Uh, yes, I've never asked PJ, and you know what? I'm gonna just enjoy the mystery.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll find a reason to bring it up. Okay, so this last one is literally mostly just copied and pasted from either the wiki or the L space, so it doesn't read particularly well. But part five, the crescendo. At the festival, Buddy performs his own folk song on his harp, which briefly restores Imp's natural personality. Afterwards, the band flees from their crazed fans, the Musicians Guild, Dibbler, Susan, and even Death on a motorbike. Susan rescues the band when the music tries to have them go out in flames, but the music begins to alter the timelines. The band will have died. Death arrives and plays an empty chord on the guitar to stop the music. Music allows Buddy/Imp to live in return for his playing a chord to restart it. Death then destroys the guitar. A new timeline is created, but Susan remembers. In the new version of events, Imp came to Quirm instead of Ankh-Morpork and is working in a nearby chippy. Nearby means nearby to Susan. If that's not clear, hopefully everybody's read the book.
From the top, Buddy's own native tune. This is what we were talking about when we said best scene.
It's up there.
Or one of, yeah. It's just so word perfect. It's just 100. It's maybe a page and a half long, but I don't know if it's been through every redraft or it's come out word perfect, but on the page it's just gorgeous. Yeah.
I bookmarked this page as well before we even had this conversation, and I bookmarked it for a specific line, which I'm now trying to find.
Let's see. I have my copy. If I can use this as a favorite quote. Every note was as sharp as a bell and as simple as sunlight, so that in the prism of the brain it broke up and flashed into a million colors. Glad's mouth hung open, and then the music folded in his head. It wasn't music with rocks in, although it used to seem doors. The fall of the notes conjured up memories of the mine where he'd been born, and dwarf bread just like Mum used to hammer out on her anvil, and the moment when he'd first realised he'd fallen in love. He remembered life in the caves under Copperhead before the city had called him, and more than anything else he wanted to be home. He'd never realised that humans could sing whole.
Yeah, so...
And there's more.
There's a lot more. Sorry, whatever I've done to my Kindle, it ruined the bookmark. But yeah, so it cuts away to the wizards watching it, and then it cuts back. And I think the line I was trying to bookmark was, it was sad music, but it waved the sadness like a battle flag.
Yeah.
And that's just like, just as a single line, it's like,
wow.
In the context of that scene, it makes, I mean, on its own, it's maybe a little corny, but in the context of that scene, I think it just sums it up so well. And it reminds me, like I do like a lot of melodramatic music. I like a lot of sad music that waves the sadness like a battle flag. I like Nine Inch Nails. I like the Sisters of Mercy. I like stuff like that. So that just like nailed it.
Yeah, all that sort of audience reaction to it is also part of the poetry. And there's a line that kind of begins that. Mr. Dibbler found his own mind spawning strange and disturbing thoughts. They involved things you couldn't sell and shouldn't pay for.
Yeah, so it's obviously like it's meant to be folk music or whatever, and like the idea that it's meant to remind you of home. Whatever the song is, reminds you of home, and the idea that Dibbler ever had a home where he didn't want to buy or sell is quite revelatory. But I think for us, like culturally, like obviously a lot of Irish folk music in particular, resonates on those themes and that idea of a diaspora that has come to a place like Ankh-Morpork. Whether it's Irish or Indian subcontinental or Caribbean or whatever, like the music inevitably always speaks of home, and I think that's something that resonates with us culturally in particular. So yeah, I thought the scene was incredible. Like, not one that I remembered offhand, from the first time. When I read it as a much less misty-eyed teenager, it was all about the death riding a motorcycle and stuff like that. But now, as a grown up, like this is the scene for sure.
Yeah, going back to what I said way back in Equal Rights, I mean, this is Pratchett doing poetry and doing poetry really well as a master. It said the universe had done all it could, but you were still alive.
Yeah,
and it's just so much character and like the obvious, the soul to it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's so clear how he just gets it, like the interconnectedness between literature, music, cinema, theater, just like that collective kind of experience, like as an audience member when you see something for the first time that just leaves an impression on you.
this
Like I've
is
never heard
this.
it
Yeah,
described like that.
it's Imp's story, and you know, if you just had that one page about Imp, um, yeah, that would be um. Well, thankfully we don't. We have a lot more than that,
Yeah, and
but
I do
there's
actually,
proof of concept right there.
yeah, I do slightly disagree with that, but I think it's all part of the plan, and that part of the slightly tongue-in-cheek representation of rock music, and it's got a lot of puns and a lot of jokes, and it's not necessarily taken that seriously for 300 odd pages, and then to go, actually, no, wait, music is serious. It does genuinely affect people. It's not just all
Right.
tapping your foot and going
Yes.
shooby doo wop or whatever. Like, it can change your life. And yeah, to sort of set that up and then to like invert it and to invert it so well, it's just like a hammer blow. It's amazing.
Yeah, you're upending a trope and then just placing it in a very important place. I would have liked to have seen a lot more of that actually.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah,
and I
Drake,
think
like we
a
didn't really
different
talk
way
about
to get some.
yeah, like we never, because it's not that important, I guess, so we never really talked about like how Lamidos is Discworld Wales, even though I've been plumbing the whole time that the dwarfs should be Welsh. Like, apparently these guys are Welsh. That's fine, because this is one of the best books, so that's worth it. What Wales is, I guess, in the kind of British cultural imagination, it is this place of music and where everybody's in a choir and, songs ring out through the valleys and stuff like that. And the fact that he obviously made that conscious choice, not just for the puns, it is so that that is familiar to his audience, and to use that as the basis for this folk music, I think, like, sort of shows you that he is always kind of thinking about like the relevant cultural references, and like to have to have a Welsh choir boy turn into Buddy Holly / Meatloaf and then back again. Like, what a journey.
Um,
Also, I like the way he puts the extra L's in. Do you notice that? So when
yeah,
yeah. So he's got it's that's the accent. It's like when Tracy has the P's
it kind
in
of
Pyramids.
annoyed me at the start, to be honest, but then you see how he uses it at the end of the book to demonstrate that Buddy's back in control to some extent. It's Buddy speaking, not the guitar.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, well, brother, it's him speaking, not Buddy. I think that's the distinction, really. Which, yeah, I know what you mean. It's like it looks makes some words harder to read, but actually, there's kind of a point to it. Like when, yeah, and I think he did use that sort of device before in Pyramids, but I think it's probably a little bit more effective here.
We've got some. We mentioned Follow Ron earlier, and this is I really love this idea of the smell of him being like a separate entity.
Yeah,
Um, and there's one of the characters from Under the Bridge. Oh God, that's another musical reference.
yeah, right.
Um,
Yeah, so we got Cumberland Michael, Philo, Ron, the duck guy,
Duckman.
Duckman, duck guy. What's that? Yeah,
He
Duckman.
never asked, but why is there a duck in
Yeah,
his head? Yeah.
and then Death joins the team as Mr. Scrub.
Well,
But
who's the character that is it? Cumberland Michael who has a sign where he promises, if you give him some money, he'll not turn up to your wedding
yeah, yeah, I
reception.
believe that's yeah, I think that's Cumberland Michael's thing. Yeah, yeah, and that whole play on like invisibility and like who we see and who we don't see, like sort of. I hesitate. It's not an afterthought, but like it's a conceit that comes in relatively late in this book because we know that it applies to people like Susan and Death, but then this idea that it applies to real people is a bit,
Right. The homeless and
yeah, I mean it's poignant,
disabled.
it's sobering, yeah.
And yeah, and that of course the so that's the opposite of the whereas Body and God and they're full stage. all eyes on them.
Yeah. The contrast there. Yeah, it feels definitely deliberate, I would say.
The wizards don't make the gig, they are watching by webcam.
The Wizards watching it on TV. TV, yeah, on the crystal wall. So there is. Reminds me, actually, one last self-indulgent story before the end. Reminds me down in my caravan. I must have been around that time. I was, or maybe just after that time I won that talent contest, maybe a year or two later, trying to tune in the black and white TV in my caravan, which had like a dial, like not even buttons, it had a literal dial, for tuning it in.
Yeah.
I'm doing the motion if people at home aren't familiar with what a dial is.
I had one with
And
a broken aerial and I had to use a coat hanger. It didn't work.
so the Smashing Pumpkins were live on BBC Two or live on Channel 4 or something. So the Smashing Pumpkins were playing a gig on live TV. And I remember my parents had gone to bed and I snuck back out to try to tune in the black and white TV to catch this concert. And I turned the electric fire on because the caravan was freezing. And as I was leaning over to do the tuning in, my hoodie caught fire. And I had to, like, beat it out with a tea towel and stuff. And after all that, I could just about got the sound okay, never got the picture good, but I think I watched about an hour of the Smashing Pumpkins playing live before I fell asleep. My parents caught me anyway, so it was totally pointless.
Rebel.
I know. And now like they're touring again and stuff, and I have no inclination to go see them. But it was so important at that moment that I saw them live on a black and white TV. But anyway.
Before we get into the finale, the only other thing I wanted to add was Albert, who
Oh,
has
really? Like,
19 minutes left to live, or
yeah, and he winds
something.
it all the way down to like 34 seconds, I think, by the time.
He's and yeah, I get on. I think we got into a bit of a friction first time Albert came up, and you were very sort of defensive of him, and yeah, he really is committed. Um,
Yeah, I feel like this is like a conscious effort to kind of redeem him a little bit, to give him a bit of agency and to make him kind of like, yeah, a bit of an active participant in the kind of death stable of characters in this kind of ongoing series rather than just, yeah, the grumpy guy with the frying pan or whatever.
Um, so we get the whole end up of Claude and Buddy and Cliff and Asphalt are on the road with Dibbler's money, and Cleek comes after them, Susan comes after them, Death, Dibbler,
It's a
and
fun little sequence. Yeah, in terms of all the carts streaking out of the city and then Death discovering the motorbike.
yeah,
Yeah, because
it took me a wee while to realize it was a motorbike,
yeah, I
even though
think
it
that
was
is
on the
one of
front
the
cover.
it is one of the slight weaknesses of the kind of real world references. 'Cause I remember getting the motorbike thing okay because at least it's on the cover of the book. The one that threw me a lot we talked about before was the shopping trolleys in whatever book that was in.
Yeah, that was Reaper Man, I think.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
right.
one of the weaker
So
parts of quite a good book. The deaths
yeah, yeah, I
brilliant.
know, agreed. So I think one of the advantages of rereading them all in a relatively short period of time is like you realize when he's trying to describe something without describing it, and then if you can just look, go, oh wait, this is going to be on the cover of the book, isn't it? Oh yeah, it's a motorbike. It's fine. Okay. I'm like, just what a great image though. Like, I mean, what a fantastic image.
Hmm.
So yeah, because it doesn't, it makes a point of making it not about the big dimension ending, dungeon dimensions or whatever. So yeah, constructing this really well written high stakes chase scene with real world stakes in the musicians and stuff, and then you've got a magical threat in the guitars trying to kill them, and then you've got Susan who's ostensibly trying to save them, but if she does save them, is that going to break the universe? And then you've got Death coming ostensibly to save the universe, but if he does, is that going to kill the band? and how's that going to affect Susan? So all the stakes come together really well. It's really well written sequence.
I found a lot of it a bit too sort of a bit too ambiguous as it went on, like who was placed where, how much of a chance they have against the guitar, and who's alive and who's not. But I did really gel with some of the final stroke of that battle, that the music can never die, but death can play a zero chord,
Empty
and
chord,
that
he calls
just
it.
it
Yeah.
makes perfectly logical sense. And
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So in a weird way, like the music thing, well, not in a weird way, in a really well thought out, well constructed way. The music thing makes more sense than the cinema thing in moving pictures because, like, he ties it all to the Big Bang and it's the background noise of the universe, which is a real concept. That's a real thing in quantum physics. So, if anything could stop that, anything has the power to stop the background noise of the universe, it's death because eventually
yeah,
the whole universe will die. So, like speaking as somebody with a single science GCSE, like this all makes total sense to me from a quantum physics point of view. Like, oh yes, well obviously death can stop the background noise of the universe. That makes total sense. So it feels a bit neater rather than just like some tentacle monsters are going to come through a portal. Like
yeah,
it feels kind of
death with
connected to our world.
what was it? Is this a gaming line where we put the chairs on the table and turn out the lights afterwards?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but then the fact that death allows that deal gets struck and death allows the music to continue, I think also makes sense because like can the universe survive without the background noise, without that background, the backbeat or whatever they call it in the book?
It's a great convergence of plot and theme.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, no, and it's totally right. Like, I mean, it definitely, I can sort of see, when he got there and he nailed that, I can see why he wanted to revisit this because, like you alluded to earlier with the whole threequel thing, like it feels like he has revisited some previous books in an attempt to kind of improve on what came before, in terms of like, Weird Sisters versus Equal Rights or Reaper Band versus Mort. And this feels like maybe an attempt to revisit that moving pictures thing where like, well, if these forces that we recognize from our world, if they enter the disc, like there has to be a as close to a real world kind of connection to that and a reason for that and a way to resolve that as possible. And this, even though moving pictures has that great visual set piece with the ape and the woman, which is the King Kong version, it doesn't, like you say, it doesn't thematically resonate in the way that this does. So yeah, this feels like again kind of him going back and improving maybe on some ideas that he's had previously, and it totally works. And both books I think are arguably stronger for it. You know.
Excellent. Um, yeah, I don't have anything more to say about this at the moment, except I'm really, really looking forward to seeing the animation. Um,
Yeah,
I imagine it's going to be big. It's going to play on all the bigness of this, and I think that's going to be quite a spectacle. I understand there's some great voice cast involved as well.
well, there's obviously a lot more Christopher Lee, which is the main thing for me anyway, personally. Um, yeah, I mean it's still restrained by the budget and the technology of the day. Like as I say, remember liking it a lot more than the Weird Sisters one, but I think it's a good thing that you've seen the Weird Sisters one first, just so that you kind of know the constraints that they're working under, basically. Um, and that, yeah, you're not expecting Toy Story or whatever. But I remember being very charmed by it at the time. I remember really, really enjoying it.
Actually, keep an eye out on our YouTube channel because I may have a Weird Sisters animation special, that I'm working on.
Oh, snap.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
this is news even to me. This is a genuine exclusive.
Coming soon, coming soon. A wee passion project.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay, so
Like we feel like we kind of did our bright spots. I don't think there'll be any surprises. I don't think we need to revisit that.
yeah, and favorite quotes as well. I just have one more.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Scum, said Crash, his voice low with resigned menace. You've bought a leopard, haven't you? Lovely, perfect build up, perfect Python-esque.
And then
Red
there's a
Dwarfian type
yeah,
build up and payoff.
call back to it later when the leopard can't hear very well. It's a deaf leopard.
Right.
No Def Leppard fans in the house? Okay. Okay.
Shall we do some pitching?
Yeah, you first. Go.
Yeah, so Milbian Bridge, audio drama. 1 hour, full Northern Irish professional cast, big budget, a critically acclaimed audio producer, Chris Roberts, Philip Henry, movie director, myself, Roman Civil War, check it out. And also my YouTube channel. So I've been doing these Doctor Who reviews, 338 seconds. I do them every week. And they're kind of, to call them reviews is a bit, they're kind of more like stand-up comedy sets with a bit of seminar thrown in. I don't know if anybody's doing any better Doctor Who videos than myself lately. So go and check those out. And I'm having a lot of fun doing them.
Yeah, they're an absolute hoot. I just watched the one for the giggle, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I'm going to start plugging now. So, The Devil's Own on BBC Sounds, just as we record, went out for its second broadcast on Radio 4 last night. So, that's going to keep it up on BBC Sounds for an additional 90 days, I believe. So, check that out. Google John Maher's The Devil's Own. If you're into conspiracy theories, if you're into ghost stories, if you're into devil worship stuff, if you're into thrash metal, if you're interested in, recent history, it's all there. It's all very interesting stuff. And was a pleasure to make and glad it's out there in the world at last. Final shout out to your usual suspects, Andy.
Yeah, thanks to our friends at the Prat Chat podcast for retweets. My top patrons, Arsenal Hyder Ali, Art K, and particularly Ian Lawther, who goes halfers on our Zoom bill for this. You can find us at Facebook and Twitter at Discord GNU, and our main hosting page is anchor.fm/I've never read Discworld. I'm also going to just take the mic for a minute longer because I have this package we're going to open, which contains the next book.
Oh yeah, there was a surprise. This must be the surprise.
And sorry, audio only listeners. That must have been a very boring bit. So our next book is Interesting Times. Oh my. That looks like a possibly familiar wizard on the cover who I've been wondering about.
Yeah.
This is the first exposure I've had. I don't, apart from what I've just seen, I know nothing about this book. But I'm pretty sure I know who that is. Somebody I've been wondering about a while. You have to tune in next time to find out, or maybe actually read the book.
Yeah, I mean, very few people are as spoiler phobic as you. Everybody knows he's coming back. We're all looking forward to it. I think I'm looking forward to it a bit more for my second read because, as you know, that particular series has never been kind of my favorite. But now that we're in this golden era, to circle back to some of the original characters, I think is going to be a joy. So I'm excited. Hopefully you are too. And I'm speaking to the listeners there, not Andy, because he's got a big grin on his face. I already know he's excited. So yeah, we've been reading some Discworld. Andy has now read approximately 31% of Discworld. That's not even close to being right. It's like 20 something.
Okay.
Yeah, don't ask writers to do maths. Can you get Ponder Stibbins on the case here? Okay.
Thanks so much for joining us, people.
Rock on.
Yeah.